Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
So, it's Thursday morning. There was some news yesterday. Second impeachment of Donald Trump. Perhaps a record
couldn't have happened to a nicer guy.
It's not only just two impeachments. It's two impeachments in one term. It's two impeachments almost within a 12-month period. It's within a 13th-month period. I mean,
it feels like a decade, but yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's impressive. I mean, it's hard to be that bad.
If Donald Trump had tried to get impeached twice, if he had tried to lose the election, you'd be hard pressed to come up with what he might have done different. Actually, I mean, it's like a Brewster's Millions type situation, you know?
So I wrote a piece at the Washington Monthly just before the insurrection, which was arguing that the Electoral College dispute in and of itself was dividing the Republican Party, which I argued was a good thing. It's a good thing for Democrats because Democrats need some Republican help to govern. If Republicans were unified in opposition to them, if Trump was
unity is not always a good thing, right?
I mean, I think in this case, it's not good for Democrats. I don't think it's good for the country to have a unified Republican Party throttling Democrats from being able to govern when they have nominal control of the government.
Well, it's certainly not good if Republicans are unified as being QAnon, a unified QAnon party.
Well, I think from that perspective, it's not good for Republicans to be unified under a Trump Q regime.
And that would be presumably the most likely scenario. I mean, more likely than a Paul Ryan-esque, Republican Party that's in opposition to Bidenism.
Right. So impeachment now is even more severely dividing the Republican Party at this point. It's almost, some might look at the House vote and say, well, there were 10 votes for impeachment. The lion's share of Republicans in the House, the majority voted to not certify the Electoral College results. And you have almost a near majority not wanting to impeach an insurrectionist president. But the Senate is likely going to be different. So
I hope. I hope. I think it is. While I commend the 10, I'm reminded of the 80s sitcom Just the 10 of Us. Bill, do you remember that?
Vaguely.
It was a spinoff.
That was a Growing Pains spinoff? Growing
Pains spinoff. Yeah, it was
the coach. The coach on Growing Pains?
Yeah. You're good at this.
See, Kirk Cameron should have done the Left Behind spinoff. That would have been a better show.
Well, I think Left Behind may be what happens to those 10 Republicans as well. So
what a segue! Oh man, you're on fire.
Full circle. So while I commend the 10, it's disgusting. It's embarrassing that there were only 10, and I hope you're right about the Senate. But what do you make of Mitch McConnell coming out and announcing that we're not going to be able to do this until gone?
Who's on fire?
I said Matt was on fire.
Oh. Do you need me to call the fire department?
No, I think the crisis is past.
Really? Because I got out of school for this, so a teacher would.
Don't you have school right now?
Well, my teacher has to go to the bathroom, so she said take a quick break. So I went to go see if there was a fire.
Where were we, Matt? The Republicans in the Senate, right?
Do you think so? Mitch McConnell is not really acting like there's any urgency here. Is that a sign that he is trying to sort of wimp out yet again, or am I reading too much into this?
I don't really understand his motivation. I mean, there's a bunch of things I don't understand here, because you would think if there's one consistent thread to the Trump presidency and the Mitch McConnell regime is ram through as many judges as possible. And one thing that has not gotten a lot of attention is, I think it is about 24, 27, excuse me, not having the number on top of my head. There's about 27 nominees that lapsed at the end of the previous Congress. Trump has only and there's more vacancies beyond that. There's about, I think, 40 or so vacancies. Trump renominated 3 judges at the start of the year. And I don't know why he hasn't nominated all of the lapsed nominees. And I don't know why Mitch McConnell isn't fast-tracking the nominees that he does have. Why have this long recess when you could be getting a few more judges in? I mean, and they should know that all the points they've scored on the Federal Judiciary Board are about to be at least partially undone, because Democrats can now nominate and approve the judges when the vacancies arise with the numbers that they have, at least the next 2 years. I don't know if they can wipe the whole board, if they can totally offset it, but they're starting to get some offset. You'd think McConnell would be sensitive to that. So at this point, by not accelerating the timetable, he will. I mean, I can't see how he gets even these last 3 through, because once you go back in session, you have to automatically go into trial under the current Senate rules. So Ossoff and Warnock get sworn in. I don't know the exact. I think it has to be by the end of next week. Could be the middle of next week. So I don't see where he gets the time to get more judges through. So what's the benefit? What's the benefit of delaying this for him? I don't get it.
I don't understand. I don't understand why presumably McConnell leaked that he was sort of encouraging impeachment, and then the next day or a day or so later says, "Oh, but we can't speed up anything to make it we can't expedite it," you know. And as you know, Bill, one of the bullshit arguments is going to be, well, there's no point in impeaching him now. He's already gone. You know what I mean? So, presumably,
the point of impeaching him from the Republican perspective is that he can't run again. Yeah. This is the Republicans' chance to say,
but I think that part,
sayonara. We are free from Trump.
That's the unspoken part, right? Because the reason Republicans want to do that is not to prevent the Republic from having to endure another Trump run. It's to prevent the Republican Party from Trump being competition.
I mean, so to the extent that might lead you to might make you suffer the ire of Trump, you can say, scream all you want. You can't run again. If you can't run again, you don't have a lot of power within the party anymore. Now that may be too pat an analysis, because Trump could.
But Mitch McConnell's not running for president, so.
But he wants a Trump-free party. He clearly would like Trumpism to go away. He wants to be the unifying glue of the party. So I think he has incentive to see Trump get convicted and banned from future office. I think he would wants to do it in a way that would minimize. I mean, McConnell needs unity. Period. I mean, if he handles this in a way that leads to 20 plus Republicans being unhappy with his leadership, I mean, he could literally lose his position. So he needs unity to function. And so perhaps trying to do this in a more slower, deliberate way might give his members more breathing room and make him and engender less backlash. I mean, that's
well, I mean, at some point it becomes Chuck Schumer's timetable and Chuck Schumer's agenda, right? It's like right now, Mitch McConnell is still the majority leader.
Until 20th, 21st, 22nd.
Right. So, so then Republicans are going to have to go on the record with a vote at some point.
Yeah.
And I would argue the quicker the better. My concern is that the longer, I think if you had held this vote on Friday, 2 days after, if you'd held, the impeachment vote, let's say, on Friday, as opposed to the following Wednesday, I think you would have picked up more votes, don't you?
I just don't know. Because
I think they move to mean, right? I mean, the normal tendency for Republicans is to not do anything. And there was this newly elected Republican Congressman, Nancy Mace.
Yeah, she is.
From North Carolina.
She is proving to be very interesting.
So she had all these words about Trump, was really kind of giving him hell. She was going after this Marjorie Greene, whatever her name is.
She's the QAnon. Right.
Related or adjacent congresswoman from Georgia?
Yeah.
Georgia or Florida? Somewhere.
Georgia.
And yet Nancy Mace voted against impeachment under the guise that it was rushed. And to me, that seems like another bogus process argument to just do nothing.
Well, and maybe McConnell's argument that he can get more votes if he doesn't rush it, and people feel like Trump had a chance to make his case. But I don't know if waiting longer allows for pro-Trump forces to raise their voices and put pressure on senators and make them hesitant. So I think it's
hard. Other problem, Bill, the other problem is at some point Joe Biden is going to be like, I can't let Donald Trump overshadow my administration. I mean, I have an agenda. I'm not going to be his Jerry Ford. He's not going to be my Richard Nixon. I can't let this guy overshadow what I'm planning to do. And that could be a danger, which would redound to Trump's benefit yet again.
Oh, I mean, Biden very much does not want this taking up an excessive amount of time, doesn't want the Senate floor to be occupied. He's already asking, can you tweak the rules so you can do a trial for the morning and pass COVID relief in the afternoon? I mean, Biden wants to turn the page.
A lot more about the Senate than I do. That seems ridiculous to me. But
I mean, Biden wants January 20th to be new day, new chapter, wipe the slate clean. All your anxieties can be washed away. So I don't think he's all that eager to have this be something that Trump continues to dominate our time and our mental energy. So I don't think, but McConnell won't be majority leader for much longer either way. So the point is the trial is going to start on the 19th. And how long that trial goes on for, I don't know. It certainly can be done quickly. I don't know if McConnell, I don't know to what extent McConnell can dictate. I don't know the rules well enough to know. Like can he set all the rules on the 19th and Schumer can't change them on the 20th? That I don't know.
You know what we should do, Bill, for our DM Zoom, and we can't make any promises, of course, but I know a few people who are sort of experts on this stuff. I don't know if I could get them. Probably can't, to be honest with you. But it would be awesome to have someone who knew the Senate rules inside and out. I could probably get someone who knows them pretty well.
Yeah.
The people I know who know them inside and out probably can't even do I mean, I know that the DM Zoom nothing has ever leaked.
That's true. We have a good track record. What happens in DM Zoom stays in DM Zoom. But so I want to talk more about what this does to the Republican Party. So I don't know if Trump will get convicted. I'm not. I wouldn't even say I'm confident. There would be it would have to be 17 votes. Republican votes to join 50 Republicans, and I'm not even sure I can count on 50 Republicans. Maybe Manchin doesn't do it. Maybe Sinema doesn't do it.
Democrats, yeah. I think Manchin is against impeachment on the record. I think he's
expressed that, but I don't know if that determines a guilty vote after a trial. Nancy Mace, do you try to have it both ways? Maybe Manchin tries to have it both ways. I don't know. But I would think you would get a higher percentage of Republicans in the Senate voting to convict than percentage of Republicans in the House voting to impeach.
Well, yeah, that makes sense for a variety of reasons, including the fact that they're not up every 2 years. So they don't have to face the Trump voters. Only a third of them have to face the Trump voters. And some of those are in safe seats, presumably.
And safe seats or just simply don't care. I mean, if you're Richard Shelby, you're over 80 years old. You're probably not running again. Do what you want. It's Mitt Romney. He's on borrowed time, and the fact that he has a political position at all, so he clearly has a devil may care attitude. And some of these people might be thinking about what's best for the long-term health of the party, and making sure Trump can never run again is better for the long-term health of the party.
You're saying that there may be some elected Republicans who actually care about the long-term health of the party or the country?
Well, the country, I'm not going to assume, but party, yes. I mean, I think Mitch McConnell cares about the long-term health of the party, as does Romney and Collins, and maybe not so much Murkowski, because Murkowski might be 1 foot out the door. But here's the thing that I'm not sure is going to come into their calculations. I mean, you can't make Trump go away quietly no matter what you do. He could try to control the party even if he can't run himself. He could try to dictate party chairs and run his kids and endorse primary challenges and the like. He could try to start a third party out of spite. I mean, it can be part spite, part grift. I'm going to start this party precisely so I smash the Republican Party and divide it in half, and I'll have a vehicle. I can't run myself, but I'd be the boss. I get to nominate all the candidates. I get to run my kids in all sorts of positions, and we'll raise money, and I'll spend all that money on my own businesses, and it'll be another circular grift like I had going on at the White House.
I think that actually may be a good scenario for us, if that were for Republicans and conservatives, if that were to happen, because, I mean, under normal conditions, that would be a very bad thing, obviously. But if you consider the state of where Republicans are today, getting rid of those people, the Trump supporters who are diehard, like ride or die Trump supporters, purging them and giving them their own party. And we still get to keep the infrastructure, the brand, and the infrastructure of the Republican Party. Seems like, considering the alternative, not a bad outcome.
I mean, but you have to really have a long-term horizon then, because the short run for Republicans would be very bad.
I'm fine with that. I mean, I think that we've gotten to a point where there is no good outcome for Republicans. It's only bad. It's less bad scenario. Which scenario is the less bad? And to me, winning isn't the end all be all. Like, just winning and one more election with the name Republican is pointless, unless you're actually having an agenda and doing something that is actually positive, right? So that probably makes me different than partisan Republicans who it's like just win, baby.
Right.
But I think that I don't think Trump would do that, because the Republican brand and infrastructure is just too valuable to give up when you could try to wrest control of it. And he's in a pretty good position still to have a shot at doing that.
He'll call it the Trump Party. And that way, even though he can't run, his name is on the ballot forever.
Yeah. Well, Trump does things out of ego and narcissism and childishness that defy logic. So he may do that. And that's possible that he would do that.
That would be work. But maybe he might be averse to doing work, or he may think he can hire people to do the work and he doesn't do it himself. But, we're starting, Ross Perot tried it. It's not so, even if you're egomaniac billionaire, it's not so simple to start a party. But Trump has a different kind of cultural persona than
Theodore
Perot
Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt being the model, potentially. Look, I have
Roosevelt
to say,
gave up. I mean, Roosevelt could have kept the Progressive Party going, and he threw in the towel. He angered the Progressive Party allies because he got a really good start in 1912, and then he was so mad at Woodrow Wilson on foreign policy grounds that he reunified the Republican Party to try to thwart him. And the Progressive Party essentially, just sputtered along on fumes after that.
And Teddy Roosevelt might have run again in 1920
as a Republican.
As a Republican, as we know from our friend, I'm reading David Petruja's memoir right now, Bill, and it's fun. It's actually funny. It's weird to say it's funny because it recounts growing up in this sort of dying upstate New York Rust Belt town. But the sort of asides that he throws in are really humorous. So like literally some laugh out loud stuff. So check that out, everybody.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So you hope for conviction. You hope that enough Republicans will conclude it's better for the long-term health of the party to rid him altogether.
I just don't know how you can have the obvious clear-cut case of Trump, fomenting an attack on the U.S. Capitol. And there's no question that all of this happened. Like, it happened before our eyes. I mean, the night before, he tweeted, something that was very incendiary. And I tweeted, this is very close to fomenting violence. That was the night before he gave his speech where he said, I'm going to march, let's march together or something like that down to the Capitol. And really, I mean, Mike Pence could have been killed in this thing. All this happened clearly before our eyes. It doesn't take an investigation. It's just obvious. And if that doesn't warrant impeachment and removal, I honestly don't know what would. So it's a clear-cut case. And if Republicans can't do that, he literally could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue.
Yeah, that's a good segue into a piece I just wrote for the Washington Monthly about what we should do about violent insurrection. But before I jump to that, I want to ask you a couple more things related to where the Republican Party's mindset is at. I feel like we're seeing attempts to try to get Republican conservative unity on some, culture war type fronts. If we can't unite around Trump, let's at least unite around this. Let's unite around big social media, big tech censorship. Let's unite around having the freedom to carry your gun inside the Capitol. Do you think those appeals are helping more, Trump-friendly Republicans say, "Hey, don't abandon us altogether. We have common enemies here that we need to lock arms and fight"?
So, first of all, I wonder if the intent is to unify Republicans around something other than Trump, or if the attempt is to help Trump by diverting attention from his sins. And so I wonder about the motives of it, first of all. Second of all, I think that the problem is that all these things, these culture war fights, it's not, I mean, the idea that like Republican congressmen should be able to just like carry guns, not just have them in their private offices, but sort of around the Capitol and in Washington, D.C. in general. And that the Republican congressmen should be able to just like skip the metal detectors and run right past them. Like that to me is a radical MAGA sort of idea. So it's not like Trump's going, let's focus on these other like tax reform, you know what I mean? Or defending the right to life. No, these culture war issues that you're talking about are like equally radical in many ways. I mean, not equally like storming the Capitol radical, but like they are radical in and of themselves. And so they may unify the right, but I don't think that they're going to like broadly unify like those of us who are off the Trump bandwagon, but are also conservatives.
I mean, just asking you, do you feel like I'm really pissed at Trump, but he shouldn't have been banned from Twitter? Or, I'm really upset about the insurrection, but absolutely, good guy with a gun better than bad guy with a gun. If Marjorie Greene wants a gun on the House floor, and Lauren Boebert wants a gun, and Mazen Cawthorn wants a gun on the House floor, they absolutely should have it. We'll be safer that way.
No, Bill, not at all. And I think one of the problems with Trump is that he actually undermines legitimate conservative concerns. And look, the problem is the moral equivalency thing, right? Like, it's hard for me to be upset at Twitter. And I don't want to say that I'm a free speech absolutist, but I'm very pro free speech. And, I've been very against cancel culture and censorship and that sort of thing. Like, as you know, Bill, we've thought about that.
Yep.
That's been one of my big things. But like, when Trump gives you the example of him using that platform to achieve what could have been deadly ends for Mike Pence and others, Nancy Pelosi, let's say, it's really hard for a conservative to sort of defend this sort of theoretical notion that we should be preserving, all speech when he is yelling fire.
I mean, the standard First Amendment example of limits is fire in a crowded theater. You don't have the right to say fire in a crowded theater.
So I would say that Trump is actually undermining he is sort of doing things that make it untenable to defend conservative positions, because it's like, you're worried about Trump not being able to tweet when he tweeted all the, how could any sane person, so there's that. I also don't, here's the other problem too. Some of the Republican Congress, so in the old days, I would have thought, well, look, if you got elected to Congress, you are a serious, thoughtful person who has been entrusted by the American public, and you have sworn an oath to the Constitution, to defend and uphold the Constitution. You've sworn an oath. And so, look, I think that, you might have made an argument why the Second Amendment, of course, the right to bear arms, you could have really made a compelling argument that because these are elected officials, because of the Second Amendment, this is like a sanctuary. Washington, D.C.'s rules don't apply. You could have certainly made those arguments. But, Bill, some of these elected Congresswomen specifically, are QAnon fans. And so the idea that they should be armed on the Capitol floor is really not that. How are they different than the insurgents who stormed the Capitol, other than the fact that they managed to get people to vote for them?
Right. I mean, just because you got elected doesn't automatically make you the good guy. You could very well infiltrate a chamber by getting elected and then do a terrorist act. And now, I'm not saying I know that they would. I'm just saying this should not give you a free pass to have you like get the skip checks. So
I agree. So the point is that I think that Trump has undermined some of these arguments that used to be kind of conservative arguments, and I'm not persuaded by these.
Okay, so let me shift to what to do about the insurrection, beyond impeachment, which is the subject of what I just wrote about the Washington Monthly today. And the title is, "It's Time for a Domestic Terrorism Law." Now, this is something that was actually being discussed in the Biden transition before the insurrection, because you can go back to the onset of the Obama administration, when there was a unit on radical extremism within the Homeland Security Department, produced a threat assessment on right-wing extremism. There was a huge backlash from Republicans saying this was politicized. This is trying to silence conservatives.
I think I was outraged by it, Bill.
You may well have been.
You have to go back and check the records.
And the Obama,
because there is a danger that somebody on the left or Democrats could paint with a broad brush and try to criminalize politics and target legitimate conservative viewpoints. And that was my concern. But I didn't understand And honestly, I don't think that the right had been radicalized to the degree that they have been at that time, but maybe they were seeing something I wasn't. I'm open to that possibility.
Well, it's like the argument the guy who wrote the report is Darrell Johnson certainly felt that way, and feels very vindicated now and has for some time. But when the unit produced that assessment and the backlash occurred, Janet Napolitano, the Homeland Security Secretary, apologized for it and dismantled the unit. So, and then in the Trump administration, there have been calls, hey, there's this growing white supremacist terrorist movement out there. You got to do something about this. The predecessor to Chad Wolf, it's Kevin. It's not McAmee, but it's close to that. I forget the exact pronunciation of his last name. He was starting to move towards, okay, we got to prioritize the white supremacist threat. He gets replaced by Chad Wolf. They're both acting secretaries. Chad Wolf drags his feet. People start complaining that you're not doing stuff on this. There's a whistleblower complaint. Finally, Wolf says, "Okay, we're gonna spend $10 million on grants to groups who are fighting white supremacist terrorism." That this was October. This just past October. So there already was.
I hate to interrupt, but sure. I've actually changed my mind about the term white supremacy. Mm-hmm. Like I was very upset that the term was being, I think, used in a different way. That white supremacist used to mean David Duke. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like you would, if someone was a white supremacist, and so like, was it Jamel Hill? I think who got in trouble for calling Trump a white supremacist. Mm-hmm. It used to mean, it was used to describe like Klans members specifically. And people who were like overt racists, who were like admittedly racists. But I do think now that literally, if you just look at the words, I mean, it is a belief, and it might be an unspoken belief, that whites should be in a dominant role in the society. And there could be people who back when whites were sort of clearly ensconced in a majority power position, they weren't that upset, but have become upset only in recent years when they feel like their dominance is threatened. And that, I think, is some part of what happened last Wednesday. That's one of the factors, I think, that was driving. And by the way, David, speaking of the domestic terrorist angle, I mean, David French, I just had him on my podcast yesterday, and he makes the point, like, Bill, imagine if President Barack Obama lost the 2012 election and he held a rally as a lame duck, and the rally, Black Lives Matters type folks showed up at the rally, and he got, delivered some fiery rhetoric, and Black Americans marched to the Capitol and invaded it. Like, never mind what would the police response have been? What would Congress have done yesterday? How many Republicans would have voted to impeach Barack Obama yesterday if that shoe had been on the other foot?
I mean, he'd be impeached and convicted by now. They would just hightail it over to the Senate and just the vote that day.
There might have been, but he would certainly. Yeah, I don't think there'd be like, well, let's not rush. Let's not rush this thing.
So, but I think, so obviously we talk about domestic terrorism laws. Some people get very triggered. They bring up Patriot Act. They talk about all sorts of ways that this will be abused and people will be locked up for their thoughts and all that kind of thing. And obviously, you can't write laws like that recklessly because there are serious constitutional concerns. But I think we should understand what specific gaps we have to deal with. And there's already, I quote one terrorism expert in the piece who said, foreign plots are about 22% successful and domestic plots are about 61% successful. So, I mean, there is an actual discrepancy here. And there are political and legal challenges because when you talk about it, people automatically jump to, hey, you're using this as a pretext to, squelch political dissent against you. So that makes your job a lot harder.
Sure. And I mean, the other point, too, just to connect it to my last interruption, is like, what if this had been, Islamic terrorists?
Sure. And some of that is domestic. Now, there's a lot of what I would call domestic terrorism, in the wake of 9/11, which was anti-Muslim. There were murders. There were physical attacks on mosques. There was a plot to blow up 50 mosques that got thwarted. That's just as much terrorism as what happened in the Orlando nightclub. So it's not like you need a domestic terrorism law just for far right terrorism. Far left terrorism has existed over the years. There's a lot less of it at the current time, but it has happened.
I wonder too, thank God we thwarted some of these things, but we ignored the bombing of the Cole by and large, and the bombing of the World Trade Center or whatever. And then they got like super lucky at 9/11, right? And then we took it super seriously and arguably overreacted, right? And sometimes by thwarting things, I wonder if we are, and I think, by the way, I'm not encouraging anybody to look the other way, right? I think we need to be vigilant here. But if this attack on the Capitol had been worse, then the response might have been tougher.
Well, right? I think some people are inclined to say, hey, sure, some folks got a hand. I would
people are saying that.
Yeah, I'm sad about what loss of life occurred, but by and large, these were pranksters.
They're peaceful.
Right. You see some folks, people like, Glenn Greenwald and Michael Tracy, who are, relatively on the left, saying this is going to be used as an excuse. Greenwald calls it the liberals 9/11. They're going to now overreact and propose all of these things to take away our freedoms and our liberties, when it really was just, a protest that got out of hand. So what I would say is, domestic terrorism is a thing. It's a real thing. It's been around for a long time. I mean, it's not just this one incident. There's MAGA bomber. There's the Liberate Michigan kidnap plot. There were the Colorado Springs Planned Parenthood shooting. There's the Charleston massacre. There's the Wisconsin Sikh temple shooting. There's the anti-Muslim things in the Bush years. There's Oklahoma City bombing in the Clinton years. That's the biggest domestic terrorism act of all time, and that was over 20 years ago. The Atlanta Olympic bombing. We remember that as how Richard Jewell got wrongly accused. We forget that the person who did do it, Eric Rudolph, had an anti-abortion, anti-gay agenda, and also bombed 3 other bombed abortion clinics and gay nightclub before he got caught several years later.
Did you see Richard Jewell?
I haven't seen the movie. No,
it's good.
Did they get into Eric Rudolph?
Just at the end. Yeah. Just at the end. But yeah, it was. It's worth seeing.
So anyway, so I think one of the issues is we don't have consistent bureaucratic infrastructure to say this is a long-term issue that pretty much never goes away. I mean, you can go back to the KKK. You can go back to the Wall Street bombing of 1920. This is not something that is ever going to be, just like basic crime doesn't go away, the threat of terrorism doesn't go away. So you should have agencies. I feel like there are
legitimate attempts to topple our government and our way of life and bring down liberal democracy. I mean, that's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
There is a Weimar-esque thing happening now, and it happened real quick. I feel like we got here real quick, thanks to Trump, who certainly expedited and helped create, but also expedite us getting to where we are. And I do feel like there's a laissez-faire sort of attitude. There's not the urgency I would want to see from anybody, but certainly the Republican Party. I mean, this is a legitimate threat, not just on people's lives, but on our way of life, on our system of government. And I do feel like there's not a lot of urgency. And if this were Black Americans or radical Islam, I think there'd be a much more intense and aggressive. I mean, I just feel like people are like, well, boys will be boys, mistakes were made. Is it me, Bill, or are people underwhelmed by this?
Well, I don't know I think where I sit, I think people are a lot more terrified. I think there are obviously people on the left who are very much in the Glenn Greenwald space, which is anytime this happens and there's calls for government expansion of police powers, we should be terrified of that and fight that. There's also a large number of Democrats who are terrified.
I'm talking about establishment conservative Republicans, the so-called adults, the elites, the people that Trump said were impotent, and he was kind of right about that, by the way, because.
Well, go on.
Well, let me make this other point. I lived in the D.C. area for 20 years. I still sort of do, believe it or not. But I lived in Alexandria, Virginia for 20 years, right across the Potomac from our nation's capital. And I loved Washington, D.C. And man, I've been back, several times in the past year. It's like Gotham now. Like, it is not the same. Washington, D.C. is a boarded up, dark. There's just a vibe that hangs over it now. That is, it's not what it used to be. And that's an aside, but
I think there is going to be degrees of urgency here. I mean, I think there are a good number of Democrats who are going to say, we've been telling you about right-wing terrorism for a long time. It's time to take it seriously. I want to be very careful in how I calibrate myself. I don't want to be a doom and gloomer. I don't want to be a demagogue and say, if you don't do this, democracy is at peril. I don't think it is that bad. I argued previously, all that's happened here, the Constitution has held sturdy. The Constitution has held strong. So I don't want to overstate what the threat is. I do think these insurrectionists are not going to go away and may do other violent and deadly things going forward, and you should take that seriously. I think there are good number of Democrats who do take that seriously. I think there are people in Congress on both sides of the aisle who just were the subjects, the targets of a terrorist attack, and they are going to take it seriously. So I think one law you could do, or a piece of a law, could be to say there is going to be, not just one unit, but multiple units. In fact, there is a Dick Durbin law passed the House actually this past fall, but got blocked in the Senate, that says, DOJ, Homeland Security, and there's one other agency. They all will have their own domestic terrorism units, and they'll be properly funded, and they will have to produce reports about what they're doing on their threats, report to Congress. So once you establish that formally, I think that orientates, the government bureaucracy. So that's one thing you could do. Now, the other thing that gets more constitutionally tricky is, what do you do about defining what domestic terrorism is and linking that to material support law? One of the main reasons why it's easier to thwart foreign terrorism plots is it's easier to apply the material support charge. You do something for Al Qaeda, you do a phone call for an Al Qaeda guy, or you buy some fertilizer or whatever it is, like that is, you will be charged for material support of aiding terrorism, because Al Qaeda, ISIS, what have you, they're on lists of being official terrorist organizations. You do anything for that organization, boom, material support. Now, you can't, and you shouldn't, create a list of domestic terror organizations. You have First Amendment right to freedom of assembly. You want to be in a white supremacist group? You want to be in a group that says America should be no more? You're allowed to hold that view. You have the First Amendment right to espouse a hateful, disgusting view. You don't have the right to commit an act of terrorism. So I don't think you ever could and shouldn't have an exactly parallel domestic terror law to what we can do on the foreign basis.
So you don't think we should designate the Proud Boys a official a sponsor of terrorism or
Correct.
something
I
like
do not believe that.
Or Antifa. I'll be bipartisan.
Correct. Now, there is material support law that can apply to domestic instances, but it's very specific. It literally spells out about 50 crimes. If kidnapping a government official, attacking a government building, there's specific things. And so if you produce material support for someone who commits one of those acts, you can be charged. There's one big omission in that list, and that is mass shootings. And some terrorism experts say that is the biggest form of domestic terrorism. So that's a big gap. So you could pass a law just to add that one crime. Now,
and I think we need to go more with attempted stuff, right? Like Trump attempted to get the Ukraine president.
If you bought the ammo for somebody who was going to commit a mass shooting and the plot was thwarted, you could, in theory, then be charged for providing the ammo under material support. If that was in the law.
What about attempting to kidnap not just the governor of Michigan, but like Mike Pence? Like what?
No, I think kidnapping's already on the list. So you can already be charged with material support of abetting a kidnapping under the current law. Now, Adam Schiff, there's some Republicans that have a law proposal like this too, but Schiff has one that's a little bit more limited, but creates a broad blanket definition of domestic terrorism. This is what domestic terrorism is. And anything that involves the risk of bodily harm in pursuit of a goal to terrorize the public. I'm not using all the exact wording, but that's the general idea. It's just for a broad catch-all that this is hereby a crime, and it is linked to the material support law. So there are civil libertarians that think that's too broad. And I read one analysis by a Justice Studies academic who said, well, under this definition, if you throw a brick through a window with a swastika on it, you're going to get, a minimum of 10 years. And
give me the broad definition again.
And it basically was, an act that with the intent to, terrorize the public or undermine the government with a likelihood of substantial bodily harm. So one argument is a brick through a window, is not good, but isn't that kind of low level? Should that rise to the level of being domestic terrorism? And my attitude is, you put a swastika on that brick, fine with me. It doesn't upset me. But I understand the need for debate there and thinking through potential unintended consequences. So I don't come out in the article saying you have to do all of these things, but I think we can have this debate with an understanding that there's a real threat here. There's some real gaps in the law, and we're not proto-fascists and authoritarians if we think we should have a law about it. And I'd also say, to a Glenn Greenwald had a tweet saying we're going to be accused of loving the terrorists if we don't support these things. I would not say that. I understand there's sincere concerns about privacy rights and freedom of free speech and freedom of assembly. So I don't need to demagogue you. You don't need to demagogue me. Let's have a good faith discussion about how to deal with a bona fide threat staring us in the face.
That could have been a good Bob Dylan lyric. I don't need to demagogue you. You don't need to demagogue me. I like that.
Thank you. But the Biden team is working on something along these lines. So I do think it's going to be something that comes up in short order. And, it probably will, like almost every time these things come up, it scrambles partisan lines. I mean, Obama had Patriot Act reforms that lost some Democrats and gained some Republicans.
This is the kind of thing where I think Trump has done harm sort of to the conservative cause by making it untenable to defend. This is the kind of thing that I would just reflexively have opposed because of my concern that it could be, weaponized to target legitimate political speech and movements but it's easier to make that argument when there isn't like a clear and present danger from domestic terrorism. And very clearly, I think now there is. I mean, I think it would be naive to think that what just happened in the U.S. Capitol is not a harbinger of things to come at some level, right? I mean, we've remember the attempted kidnapping of Gretchen Whitmer. Mm-hmm. That was bizarre. We hardly ever talk about it. And by the way, last week, correct me if I'm wrong, but there were like bombs planted at the RNC and the DNC that were discovered.
Yep.
No one is even mentioning that anymore. That's pretty much been memory hold. This is a crazy thing. And so I suspect now Inauguration, man, DC right now, I think there's tens of thousands of National Guards troops already deployed in our nation's capital. There's laser wire up around the area where the inauguration will take place. But now there's talk that there could be unrest in our state capitals on Inauguration Day. So it's going to be hard to police this.
I mean, the thing that's really
and Bill, let me just say, I am concerned about preservation of this democracy because I see things that remind me of, revolution in Tsarist Russia, of the Weimar Republic with the sort of paramilitary element of it. Also, the radical left versus the radical right, kind of communist versus fascist taking place with these groups. This is new. This is not normal for America. There's stuff happening here that is outside the experience of our lives, certainly. And even I realize crazy stuff was happening before you and I were born, like in the 60s and the Vietnam era and the civil rights movement and all that. And there was a lot of bombings and stuff. But I don't think it was like what we have right now.
Well, what's different now, I mean, we've gone through some weird stuff. I mean, we had the Wall Street bombing in 1920. We had the Weather Underground. We had the assassinations of Harvey Milk and George Moscone in San Francisco. We had the Symbionese Liberation Army. We had Oklahoma City. I mean, we've had some serious stuff that's gone down. Some tragic, some just truly weird. The thing that is different now, a lot of the far right terrorism up until this point has been individual activity, so it got kind of downplayed as lone wolf and not seen as part of a larger pattern. And now with the rise of social media, all of these quote unquote lone wolves are getting together and, essentially doing, violent flash mobs. And that can sustain over a long period of time, especially when it is.
That's a good point, Bill. I don't know how these mobs got organized in the past, like the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution. I don't know how they got organized because now it's so easy. I mean, you can tweet, you could have signal, tweets, email, all sorts of communication are available now, making it so much easier to organize a radical mob.
I mean, I don't know how they did it. But also, yes and no. I mean,
I couldn't pick. I don't know how they picked people up at the airport in 1975 or how you met somebody at the mall, much less how you would organize a revolution. Before.
Well, what I think is, not so easy for the terrorist in our midst is that, I think anything that's bottom up in orientation, which a lot of social media stuff is in many ways disorganized. You don't have a Lenin here who is really running a tight ship. So
we have an Ali Akbar,
and to organize online is to make things really easy for law enforcement if you're paying close attention and taking it seriously. You don't have to bug people. You don't have to do clandestine surveillance. You just have to Google and go on chat rooms and see what they're doing. And
now they're going on Signal.
Maybe folks are going to do more, quasi-underground things at this point.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you have people who are storming the Capitol and posing for selfies and taking their own videos to handing evidence over to the authorities. So I don't know how much people are going to be doing this with impunity going forward, but it is easier to track certain things if you prioritize it and see it as something that it's going to lead to concrete action. And these people who are doing it right now are hardly,
But how does the Republic survive, Bill, when because of technology, you have the ability to spread conspiracy theories in ways that are no longer fringe, that are mainstream, and also to organize these sort of flash mobs? And Bill, the fundamental problem, going back to where we started, was the Republican Party. What percentage of the voters are simply a basket of deplorables? I mean, like what percentage of Republican voters are irredeemable?
It's hard to know through polling data because polling has been an imprecise instrument.
But who knows, apparently, are the Republican congressmen who time and again are afraid to do the right thing. And why is that?
Well, but even their fear doesn't automatically mean you can put a hard number, a hard percentage on how many people we're talking about. I mean, it could be a small number and they'd still be worried about their physical, health.
That's the case now, Bill, that there's some physical intimidation. But up until very recently, I think it's been a political fear of getting sideways of the voters whom they knew were Trump supporters. And I have to tell you, my assumption up until the last several years had been that the average Republican voter was sort of like me, like maybe they're a rural, God-fearing Christian, or maybe they're a country club, chamber of commerce, business person, but they're mainstream, suburban, some rural, but just decent, good folk who just want the best for the country and believe in things that I believe in. I wonder if that's right. I mean, is there a silent majority even in the Republican Party, or is the majority of the Republican Party Q adjacent at this point?
Well, I think we're going to find out. I mean, this is a searing event that just happened. It does kind of put upon people, whose side are you on here? You might have flirted with some of these things before, but are you really down for the insurrection?
Yeah. And I have a question for you, Bill.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time talking about my political epiphanies and awakenings and all that. And as you know, I'm still just as conservative as ever. It hasn't changed my personal philosophy. It has changed my perspective on things like the use of the term white supremacist,
right,
as we noted earlier.
Right.
But Bill, you used to write a blog called Liberal Oasis.
Yes.
And the last time I Googled you, I saw that you were sort of described as a centrist or someone who believes in centrism. Are you still a liberal?
Yes. No, I've never changed that. I don't identify myself as a moderate or a centrist. And I define that by meaning I want to see government action to solve public problems, to the fullest extent possible. And I don't think there is any inherent policy benefit at trying to find the middle for the middle's sake. Now, one thing where I have recalibrated...
Common good concern wants the government to achieve the good as well.
I'm sorry, you cut out of my feed there.
Common good conservatives want to use government to achieve positive, good public policy ends as well, Bill. Are you with them?
I mean, our ends might be different, and the degree which we would turn to government is probably different. But the fact that common good conservatives exist is why there's some chance of actually coming together and finding some overlap, and that's where
these are people like Josh Hawley.
Well, I mean, there are certain folks like Matt Stoller, who is very big on antitrust and trying to break up, a big business consolidation. Was very infatuated with Hawley up until very recently, because Hawley was
Bernie Sanders did some sort of stimulus deal or something.
Well,
with him, right?
They overlapped on the checks, and this is always the challenge. I think amongst more establishment Democrats and Republicans and more ideological, progressives and conservatives, like there are certain points of overlap that can be found, but are the points where there isn't overlap, are they so severe that it really thwarts any kind of long-term partnership? I mean, I don't know how much Matt Stoller is going to be talking of Josh Hawley in the future at this point. And so where I think I have changed my thinking over the years, and where you could, credibly put the moderate tag on me, is that the belief that there is social value in pursuing bipartisanship, so we don't have extreme degrees of polarization that undermine the basic pillars of our institutions. If we're constantly demonizing the other side and painting people with broad brushes, you get to where we are today, with literal insurrection. So I'm definitely more partial to saying, hey, let's find where the common ground is, and that might limit what I would otherwise ideally like to achieve policy-wise, because there's other positives I'm going to get out of finding that bipartisan common ground. Yeah.
I would even say, as a conservative, I would have gone back and probably been more interested in the Ross Douthat, Sam's Club Republican sort of stuff, right? Of finding a way to placate, is a word, kind of the working class populist energy in the Republican Party, even though I don't actually agree with some of those policies that would have placated them, it might have kept them from being vulnerable to a demagogue like Trump. Mm-hmm. And so, hindsight's 20/20, but sometimes, you can give up some of the perfect to some of your perfect ideal public policy goals, because sometimes winning's losing and losing's winning.
I think we should leave on that note, Bill. Yeah, we should leave on that note. I got some family school-related business to take care of.
Yeah.
We'll DM Zoom tomorrow?
Yes, we'll DM Zoom tomorrow. I do want to plug. I just did several really good podcasts. You should check out Trevor Moawad, who is a mental conditioning coach, including Russell Wilson, is someone that he has worked with extensively. Came on the podcast to talk about taking on negativity in your life, something we could probably all do. I talked to my cousin, Thomas Geisberg, who's a world-renowned Ebola researcher, and he was named one of Time's Persons of the Year in 2014 when it was like the Ebola scientist was the person of the year. And we talked about the vaccines. And then most recently, David French and I had a really interesting discussion about some of these same things you and I talked about today. So check it out, Matt Lewis and the News. And Bill, people should read the stuff you're writing right now as well.
Right, so check out my latest at the Washington Monthly. It's time for domestic terrorism law. If you haven't seen it, right after the insurrection, I wrote The Constitution Won, which is an ode to what the founders did, and I think is saving us from these. I'm more sanguine about how sturdy our political structures, institutions are withstanding this. I think more work needs to be done just to protect our bodies in the wake of these things. But I'm positive about our system of government keeping on.
That makes me happy, and gives me hope. People should be supporting us at Patreon, either patreon.com/Bill Scher or patreon.com/Matt Lewis. And you can do these awesome Zoom chats that Bill and I do pretty near every single week. Anything else, Bill?
I gotta drive this kid to her school pod, so I gotta
All
run.
Right.
No,
See you in the DMZ next week.
We're on a 3-minute break, so I'm coming to crash the party.
I see. All right. Till next time, Matt.
See you guys.
Bye.